Every NFL free agent cycle always has a couple of boom or bust players, so today let's talk about the top 5 biggest boom or bust players of the NFL free agency. I don't think I really have to explain this all that much. It's really just a boom or bust player. Each player has their own description, so we're going to talk about them separately. And we are going to begin with the Justin Fields trade. Now, the reason why this is a boom or bust is simply because if Justin Fields turns out to be the guy we think he can be, then that might be the biggest boom of the entire free agency class. However, if it doesn't work out, and let's say he doesn't turn out to be the franchise quarterback we think he can be, well then of course it would be a bust, and in that situation it would more than likely set the Pittsburgh Steelers back a couple years. Now, of the players on this list, I would say that Justin Fields is maybe the least boom or bust player, and that's simply because the Pittsburgh Steelers really have not spent a ton of either assets or money to acquire Justin Fields. So hypothetically, if Justin Fields is to not be the franchise quarterback, Pittsburgh Steelers, yes, they'd be set back a couple years, but they wouldn't be totally screwed. This upcoming season, it appears that Russell Wilson will be the starting quarterback for this team, so therefore Justin Fields will be able to sit back and kind of relax and just sort of understand the system so that next year he can come in and be the true starting quarterback. And I think ultimately this does work out pretty nicely for him. I can actually completely understand why Justin Fields would want to join a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's a team that has had a ton of success, and it's been an organization that knows how to develop quarterbacks pretty well, outside of course, Kenny Pickett. For Justin Fields, he gets a chance to take a step back, reevaluate what he needs to get better at, and just become a better player in the long term. But again, for the Pittsburgh Steelers, there is an element of a boom or bust player here, given the fact that yes, if he does turn out to be great, then good on you and you get your franchise quarterback. But if it doesn't work out, then you're going to have to restart yet again at the quarterback position, which could set you back 2 to 3 years. But now let's move on to one of the biggest offensive lineman signings of the upcoming free agency, Tyron Smith to the New York Jets. Now, similar to Justin Fields, the New York Jets actually didn't pay Tyron Smith too much to get him. I believe it's only a 1-year, $6 million deal with incentives to be worth up to $20 million. Now, I don't think we know what those incentives necessarily are, but I would assume it would be something along the lines of if he makes an all-pro team, if he makes a Pro Bowl team, if he plays a certain number of games, then he gets a couple extra $1 million into his bank account. But as of right now, we don't know the full incentives and what it could mean. And for Tyron Smith, he's kind of been a boom or bust player these past several years. If he plays, he's one of the best offensive tackles in the entire league. But if he doesn't play, well, you're just having an injured player on your injury report every single game. And for a team like the New York Jets, who's been suffering from injuries these past couple years, they're going all in with this boom or bust mentality, signing guys like Mike Williams, Morgan Moses, and now Tyron Smith to go along with Aaron Rodgers and Breece Hall. You have a team that has suffered some injuries this past couple years, and you're heading into next year with a couple of these guys sustaining injuries just last year. Mike Williams had a leg injury last year. Aaron Rodgers obviously had the torn Achilles. Tyron Smith last year missed some time, and he's been missing a lot of time as of late. I think the New York Jets are taking a lot of risks here, and I think Tyron Smith is definitely one of those players. Now, the good thing is for the Jets is if these players are to work out, well, you're going to get a top 5 player in those positions, at least when it comes to certain players. Like Tyron Smith, when healthy, is arguably the best offensive tackle in the league. Mike Williams, when healthy, is one of the best wide receiver 2s in the league. Morgan Moses, when healthy, is a really good and reliable right tackle in this league. So like I said, if it works out, then boom. If it doesn't work out, well, then it busts. Next, we move up to a player who I really did not like this signing. However, I do understand why they did it. It is Calvin Ridley going to the Tennessee Titans. Now, the contract is 4 years, $92 million, with a signing bonus of $20 million and a $50 million guaranteed salary. This puts him at an average annual salary of $23 million for a wide receiver who has never, at least consistently, shown to be a wide receiver 1 in the NFL. His best year was his last year with the Atlanta Falcons, and then of course he had the suspended year, and then last year he was the true wide receiver 1 for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And yes, he was a pretty productive player for the Jaguars and of course the Atlanta Falcons, but however, he has never really shown to be that consistent true wide receiver 1, and being paid $23 million a year, assuming that they continue to pay his contract this way, is in my opinion a far too big of a contract for a guy who, in my opinion, is just not a wide receiver 1 in the NFL. Calvin Ridley is also not a super young player. Calvin Ridley is 29 years old, which puts him at the same age as Amari Cooper and only 1 year younger than Mike Evans. But now you put him on a 4-year contract that will make him a 33-year-old player getting potentially paid $23 million. Again, we're talking about a guy who's only had a couple really good years, but outside of that has been very inconsistent. And I think last year with the Jacksonville Jaguars, it it was on showcase the entire time. Whether it was some drop pass, some low effort plays, or just not performing up to expectations, Calvin Ridley is going to be a very risky player for the Tennessee Titans. Now, the good news for the Titans is that you do have DeAndre Hopkins next year, who's going to be your wide receiver 1 next year, so I do think Calvin Ridley will seriously work out for this team next year. But my concern for this team is going to be past this upcoming season. Once he is that true wide receiver 1, can he step up to the mantle and really be that true big guy? So the boom element here is that he can live up to be that wide receiver 1 and he plays fantastic, but the bust element is that you're paying a 30-plus-year-old wide receiver $23 million annually to just be mediocre at best. Now, before we get to my number 2, I want to give a special shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy is the easiest and fastest growing fantasy sports app available. I know the NFL season may be over, however, Underdog has plenty of ways to entertain us while we wait for the new season. You may not know this about me, but I am a massive NBA fan, and with Underdog's Pick'em games, I can earn some serious cash. Simply pick higher or lower on 2 to 5 player stats, and you'll have a chance to win up to 20 times your money in a single night. I personally love playing these Pick'em games on game day to spice up my afternoon. And all you have to do is use the link in the description below to sign up today using promo code MetroSports, and you can get your first deposit doubled up to $100, as well as an instant Pick'em special. Check the map on the screen right now to see if your state qualifies, and I want to give a massive thank you to Underdog for sponsoring today's video. Alright, let's now move on to number 2, Patrick Queen going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Patrick Queen signed a 3-year $41 million deal with an 11.5 signing bonus and $13.8 million of it fully guaranteed. Now, contract-wise, I actually really like the contract for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't necessarily love the 3 years aspect of it, but the guarantees and the signing bonus do make a ton of sense for this contract. But in my opinion, Patrick Queen as a pure player is one of the biggest boom or bust options out there. If Patrick Queen is what he was last year with the Baltimore Ravens, then yes, you're going to get one of the top linebackers in the NFL. However, it's hard to really tell if his production and his play is more based off the fact that he had a really good running mate in Roquan Smith with him, or if it was just simply him being that really good linebacker. I sort of take the middle on this one, where I think in a sense, yes, he's a good linebacker, and yes, he was a good fit with Mike McDonald, but I also think that Roquan Smith definitely did make his life a lot easier, and honestly, that's how it should be. And for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are a team that desperately did need a proven and productive linebacker in that linebacking room, getting a guy like Patrick Queen, who you have some experience playing up against because, of course, you know, you play the Baltimore Ravens twice a year. This is a Steelers team that knows what they're going to be getting in Patrick Queen. So for me, the bust element in this situation is that you're paying a guy 3 years, $41 million to a player who has only really had maybe 2 really good years of play, but has kind of struggled at other points in his career. But the boom element of it is that if Patrick Queen is who he was last year, then you're getting arguably a top 5 linebacker in the league. Again, he was going to be one of the biggest boom or bust options out there, and I think for any team outside of really the Baltimore Ravens, it was always going to be a risky bet. But I will say the Pittsburgh Steelers, in my opinion, did make the smart move to make this signing. So it's not like I think that even if it's a bust in this situation, that it was a bad contract. I still think it was a good idea for them to get this guy. But lastly, let's talk about the biggest boom or bust player of the free agency cycle, Kirk Cousins to the Atlanta Falcons on a massive contract. Now, Kirk Cousins' contract with the Atlanta Falcons is a 4-year deal worth $180 million, with $50 million of it being a signing bonus and $100 million of it being fully guaranteed. Now, I love Kirk Cousins, and I think that he is a very good player, and a player that a lot of people just kind of gloss over and use him as sort of like the mark of a quarterback that can win a championship. People often say that Kirk Cousins is the best quarterback who will never win a championship, basically implying that he isn't a championship level quarterback. But I've always been on the contrary to that, and I always think that that's kind of a silly mark because, you know, you have guys like Jimmy Garoppolo who've made a championship, so I know that Kirk Cousins easily could in the right situation. And Kirk Cousins, before the injury last year, was playing out of his freaking mind, and in my opinion, he's been one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. However, and a big however, he's coming off a torn Achilles at his age. Kirk Cousins is not a spring chicken. He's no longer in his 20s. He's deep into the 30s, almost at the 40 age, and he's coming off a torn Achilles. For the Atlanta Falcons, I still do like the signing. In fact, if you go back on my channel, I was talking about this signing happening before free agency was ever happening, and I wanted this to be a done deal because I think Kirk Cousins is a perfect fit with the Atlanta Falcons and what they're trying to build. But I cannot deny that he is the biggest boom or bust player out there because let's say the injury doesn't heal fast fast enough, and he actually struggles next year with that torn Achilles, or even worse, gets injured again with another torn Achilles or another leg injury, because once one wheel falls off, it always seems like for these older players, the other wheels are eventually going to fall off as well. And for Kirk Cousins, because he's at that age where having one torn Achilles could lead to potentially more injuries, it's always going to be a risky bet. Now, the boom element of this is that Kirk Cousins is going to be a top 10 to top 15 quarterback who can lead this already super loaded Atlanta Falcons team to a potential championship or some deep playoff runs. However, the bust element in this situation is that, well, Kirk Cousins isn't the guy he was prior to the injury he sustained. There's also the bust element of, let's say Kirk Cousins can't return to his former glory. You're paying that guy 4 years, $180 million. Now, yes, there are some potential outs after the third year, and yes, you can figure out the contract situation, but regardless, this is a massive contract and a very risky bet to place on an older quarterback who's coming off a torn Achilles, who's now getting paid $180 million. Now, in this situation, I like most of the contracts, and I actually like most of the signings. I'm not the biggest fan of Calvin Ridley, but I like the rest of these signings for the most part, so I'm willing to bet on the boom aspect of this more than the bust aspect. However, we have to relay the facts. These are the 5 biggest boom or bust, and if you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.